Good morning. What is your body's state of hunger? Do you feel hungry? Those belly pains that actually cause that feeling of hunger? And is it your body actually that's telling you to eat then? Or is it something else? All the other factors that contribute to eating that are making you hungry. Welcome to Mental Fortress Mondays. I'm Dr. Cheryl Carthouse, naturopathic doctor. My mission here is to explore the who, what, where, when, why mindfulness, our mindfulness-based practices, how they impact our physiology, our ability to work, our performance and work and hobbies, and our overall quality of life. I started this series to provide support and develop mental resilience during the recent pandemic and the closures that we have and everything that is still ongoing as well, especially as school approaches, everything start to open up. There's going to be a lot of shifting and adjusting. And we want to make sure that in the mission here as well, we want to make sure that I'm going to be able to provide guidance, some how-tos of building that mental resilience, our emotional intelligence to become much better at navigating all of these stressful kinds of situations, especially the things that we run into every life, because they really are ongoing. Stress for us in general here, at least in Canada, is something that we push ourselves through and we continue to try and push forward through. We don't always deal with it in the most effective way, especially that chronic style, that chronic type of stress. And so we want to become resilient to it, to everything that we encounter today and tomorrow, and then really it will impact the fulfillment that we feel like we have and really the joy in our lives. The last 2 weeks, we discussed our relationship with food through mindful eating. Part 1, we covered all the complexities of appetite and all the different factors that contribute to our appetite. And then we explored the external factors of eating, as well as then last week we covered the mind-based type of internal factors. And here is our model that helps us to describe all of those things. So eating being in the center there, and then our external factors were the availability of food, social aspects of eating, so who are we eating with, what does that social environment look like, and then the setting, which is all of those physical things that are going to impact the process of eating, so our plate, the table, the lighting, all of that kind of stuff. And then over on the internal side, we have all of our learned habits, and that was a fairly big one that incorporated, past things, our relationship to food, which really everything kind of influences a little bit, but there was a hot topic on that one. And then our mood, our current mood, the emotions that influence eating, as many people have experienced, I'd say probably all of us, we have emotionally eaten at some point in our lives. And then stress and the level of stress. And as that changes, our ability to really function well within what we've termed our window of tolerance, the term that we've used, I didn't coin it, really that level of stress then can influence how we're going to behave and how we're going to eat and the things that we're going to do, and are they really helpful for us? Are they really loving ourselves or not? And then the last one that we're going to cover today, which maybe gets into a little bit more of this medical perspective, is the body and metabolism. And those are the things that really set what our body is doing to feel hungry, to store all of our food and our nutrients, even to absorb them. So how are you feeling in terms of energy and the ability for your body to process that food? So storage and metabolism of the body. This also includes then our energy states and our hunger states. So energy in versus energy out. We'll explore various health states of the body and dis-ease of the body that influence eating habits, and cover some tips and tricks along the way and the specific tips around hunger and when to eat. So health states of the body. And what do we mean by dis-ease? So when the body is not easy, it's not doing all the things that it needs to do in an easy way, it's out of that ease. And so then we have these states called disease. They affect both men and women, all kids, everybody along the whole spectrum. And one of the biggest things is that they also impact how we feel, but they influence our eating habits, and that physiological component of them can have a number of different contributions to our health. So to cover the first one, now I'm just going to touch on all of these as we want to make sure that we're going to get through a number of different things here. If you have specific questions about things, feel free to fire them over, and we can even do a question and answer kind of thing in the future if everyone has more questions about these particular approaches, or maybe about how naturopathic medicine might deal with them, or even how we test for them. So the first one is our hormone function, and that's for men and women. We often think of hormones as just the sex female hormones, something like going through menopause or having our monthly cycle, that kind of thing. But in this one of the biggest hormones that influences our metabolism rate is our thyroid function. Your thyroid is the major hormone producer that regulates metabolic rate, which is your ability to use the energy, to eat the energy, and then to process or use it in whatever functional way you're going to. Often people with hypothyroidism tend to gain weight and have a really hard time getting it off because their thyroid is saying, we need to store this up. And so regardless of exercise that someone might do, they tend to put weight on. And then same on the other side, hyperthyroid sometimes can lead the body to have a really, really high metabolism, and then we lose the ability to gain weight, and sometimes people are a little bit more on the thinner side. Now those are the traditional hypo. There are always cases that go outside our norms and are outside our box. And so it's a funny one because it's slightly tricky in terms of how the blood work and the diagnostics work and how it's evaluated. Typically, not all of the three major blood work components are measured. Usually it's only TSH, which is thyroid stimulating hormone, and we often miss T4 and T3. It's just not done typically in our routine blood work through medical doctors. Some medical doctors may do it if they weren't concerned for it, but it's also in the strategy and the approach. And so often there's a lot of kickback, I believe, if extra blood work is ordered when TSH is normal. Now the tricky part with that is TSH can do this throughout the day, and so it may fall within that normal range even when it's not normal or you're still having symptoms. I'm very thankful that I can run blood work, I can run thyroid panels, or whichever measures that we actually need in order to effectively measure thyroid and then find out what's going on. So this is something that we often would do if needed. Now, again, we can do a whole bunch of different testing and all that kind of thing, and I'm, again, at least in Nova Scotia, I'm very thankful that we can run that. Sex hormones, they can influence and change, especially during menopause and then after menopause or going through it and then afterwards as well. And so it's something to consider and even to understand if someone's actually in menopause or not, if you're not quite sure. So those hormones can actually be measured as well. Chronic illness or infection can of course influence our appetite, often through a feeling of nausea, which is controlled by the vagus nerve. And we'll explore that in just a few minutes. A toxic burden to the body with some sort of chronic illness or infection, or even just separately on its own, can lead to various problems along the digestive tract, and also these low-grade problems that wear on the body over time. Some of these could be issues like exposures to mold, either in the past or current. So these are something that people can actually have mold exposures way in the past and kind of have I never really was the same since that. And those can actually harbor in the body, and they can produce toxins, and they can have a huge influence on the body. Same thing with other exposures such as pesticides, chemicals, or heavy metals. And for those ones, it's not always, and actually mold as well, it's not always just one big exposure, though as I mentioned, that can happen. But it's also these accumulations. If our body has a hard time getting rid of all of these toxins, then it builds up over time, which is why we can seem okay for a while, and then we gradually maybe get a few symptoms here or there, and then all of a sudden we wake up one morning and say, yeah, okay, this isn't totally new, but now all of a sudden they're kind of bad, and not, I'm not in a good state, or now I'm really realizing that I'm putting weight on, or my eating's really affected, I'm feeling nauseous all the time, whatever, any of those little plugs along the way can give us a bit of a sign that there's something happening with the body. And then we can move forward to really help to understand that through looking into each of these different items as well. We can have digestive intruders. This can cause bloating, discomfort, pain, a feeling of fullness right after you eat or even after a few bites. And people can still be putting on weight as well when they're not necessarily eating as much. This often, again, comes with a feeling of nausea, but not always. These can include parasites or small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, which can cause a lot of bloating. We can actually have even like yeast and fungal growth within our body. And anything like IBD, so irritable bowel syndrome, IBS, and then irritable bowel disease. Something like Crohn's or diverticulitis or even polyps are a beginning start. The polyps are the beginning start to these progressions happening. And so the earlier that we catch all of these things and improve the absorption, because that's where your food is going to be absorbed into your body, it's going to affect your energy, often your motivation, just overall even how you're feeling, then we can start to change that environment and change how everything is moving and working to absorb the food that you are actually eating. And then movement of the digestive system. It's astounding how many people seem to have issues with the movement of food through their digestive system. From just reading here, we have a comment. Self-imposed restrictions like fear, certain foods like dairy allergy, for example. Yeah, very, very much. So we can have a lot of influence on previous symptoms that might have impacted our digestive system, and then how these are actually impacting our wanting to try these foods again or not. And then so people can end up having these really, really restricted diets, and then food becomes maybe unpleasurable or really restricted and a source of anxiety. And so by applying a whole bunch of these different things that we've gone through over the last couple of weeks, and then today as well, I'm going to mention a few different things about that, then we could start to kind of move through them. There may also be that physical aspect that we want to improve too. And then there may be some foods that overall you just might need to avoid for the future. So if there is a particular dairy lactose intolerance with dairy, that you might just not have the enzymes to eat it. So there are supplements you can take and that kind of thing. For celiac disease as well, you just need to avoid gluten. And that's not something that's going to be able to be compromised. And then arguably with certain other types of things, you may want to avoid certain foods as well, because they're really going to impact how your body is doing. It might be for a time, or it might be longer term as well. So just getting back to that movement of the digestive system, we can have the stomach be essentially lazy and not emptying well. This is called gastroparesis. And that means that the stomach isn't emptying the contents of the food, and so you can feel full often. And then so sometimes people aren't eating as much, or they're not enjoying their food, or they might just be feeling nauseous as well. This can occur due to injury of that famous vagus nerve that controls so much of our digestive system, possibly post-surgery. Maybe there's been other trauma or an accident, and we can actually throw out the vagus nerve through high stress. So that to whatever degree that then would actually cause gastroparesis, but definitely contribute to things. There's always a range of how this is functioning, either optimally or not. And it's not just one of these two things, that we often think that it's either on or off based on a diagnosis that we might be given, but there really is a full range of how functional this is right now. The other things that can contribute to gastroparesis is hypothyroidism, autoimmune diseases, and then nervous system disorders like Parkinson's or multiple sclerosis, different things like that, and then even viral infections, or many more things, but for the majority of those are the basis of them. So even an infection can affect that. And then motility of the rest of the digestive tract. So you have something called, everyone does, a migrating motor complex. This is the intestinal tract that has all these muscles around the whole thing, and it does this movement. That's called the peristalsis movement, and it squeezes your poop or your food through, and then it eventually starts to make poop. And that whole motion is also controlled by the vagus nerve, and I'm going to get into that a little bit more in the future. And that can also often cause essentially like a lazy digestive tract. And so the absorption of nutrients then are quite low. And again, this affects our energy levels, likely if we're not absorbing food. Many things that come along with that, maybe being constipated, that can come along with a feeling of nausea. And a lot to do with how we're feeling and then how we relate to food as well, or if we get pains or discomfort really close to eating a particular food, or the tricky one is really far away. You can have symptoms from a food up to 3 days, possibly even longer, of like a reaction or some version of discomfort or a feeling from food up to 3 days or sometimes even longer, but about 3 days from a particular food. How are you going to figure that out? You eat one thing one day and then you feel something 3 days later. It can be a really tricky thing. But the migrating motor complex, so this movement that has been in so many people. I don't know what the percentage exactly would be, but I would say based on my practice and different things, honestly, probably 70 to 80% of people have some sort of issue with the migrating motor complex. It can be affected by different types of bacterial growth in the small intestine, where they shouldn't be. They should all be in your large intestine. It can be caused by a dysbiosis as well, so the wrong bacteria being in places, or different kinds of parasites or bugs being in places they shouldn't be. From scar tissue or adhesions, so any type of abdominal work or even trauma can actually start to create these little ties. It's like this tissue, your body's creating all this scar tissue around to try and hold things in place, or because things have been torn or cut or moved or ripped, then they start to create better bonds, which means if as a scar tissue, it's not as mobile. And then so instead of being able to flow past it, these adhesions make it not movable as well. And so that can then impact the movement of the digestive system. These can happen for really any type of trauma, so including the motor vehicle accidents or a fall. Excessive laxative use can actually impact how the movement naturally occurs, eating disorders, and then some medications as well. So let's discuss the health of this famous vagus nerve. The vagus nerve controls many things in our body, and it controls many things that have to do with eating and other symptoms and that influence our eating. As I mentioned, the vagus nerve controls the smooth muscle of the digestive tract. And this is everything from swallowing, so really like the back of your throat and all of that movement, moving food down our digestive, or down into the stomach. It's all part of our digestive tract, into the stomach. That churning that occurs is all smooth muscle around the stomach, emptying the stomach, and then that movement through the intestines as well. And the ability then for your cells to absorb all of the food as it's present around that space. And then moving the nutrients, and as it creates poop, eventually your vagus nerve is essentially responsible for all of that movement. And so if you get nausea, this is also a factor or a responsibility of the vagus nerve. And nausea can dramatically increase or decrease our appetite, but really impact how we're eating and our enjoyment of food as well, and how we're overall feeling. And the vagus nerve covers that feeling of nausea. So we want to make sure that our vagus nerve isn't being thrown off track. And as I mentioned, there's a whole slew of things that can impact this. Stress is one of them. And so if we have these little activities and these little things that we can do at home to help balance the vagus nerve, that can really help to bring things into alignment, at least from that nervous system side. And then we can work from that physiological side as well. In naturopathic medicine, we're always kind of doing this and seeing which other part needs to be supported in that way in order to then have the body move from the state that it's currently in into a different state where you'll feel better and more alive and be able to function with all of these things. And so we explored the physical dis-ease states that can influence weight and the state of hunger. And then how about our behaviors, how they influence our metabolism and body directly? Exercise, then, would be the main factor. People often eat healthier, desire healthier foods, and eat within better proportions when they exercise regularly and they exercise well. And what do I mean by exercising well? Is to increase your heart rate and really sweat. Get that movement going. Sometimes a really low-key walk doesn't impact our energy usage and our metabolism nearly as much, and so you want to be able to get your heart rate up for a duration of time. I'd say at least 20 minutes, and do that several times a week, a couple times a week, at least 3. Consult your medical team, your health authority if you're not sure how much exercise you should be doing, or if you have any physical issues that should be impairing, or if you have other diseases that might then impact how you can do physical activity. Of course, always consult your healthcare team. So you want to get your heart rate up, and you want to sweat. You want to do it at least 20 minutes. We want to do it at least 3 times a week. It is so, so, so important to find activities you enjoy. You are much likely to engage in those activities on a regular basis when you enjoy them. I always say I don't exercise, I play. Because if it's not fun for me, I won't do it. I don't like going to the gym and lifting weights and that kind of thing unless I'm with a person or a partner who's like encouraging me and we're doing something, we're trying to, do things for a particular purpose, we're training for something. I just can't get my head around it. It's not enjoyable for me. So I need to chase things or people, maybe a ball or a frisbee, or climb things or go on a hike where it's a mission to move and go exploring and see what else is there. But the exercise isn't something that I often think about. It's the goal and the activity and the bonding with people. And so if that's not a part of it for me, I won't do it on a regular basis. I might engage in it here and there, but it's not going to be something that's going to really improve my metabolic rate or change that and influence it. It's not going to be something that changes my relationship with food. So think about that. Figure out what play is for you and how some sort of play can be incorporated with the exercise that you're doing to make it as enjoyable as possible. It can also be helpful to incorporate mechanisms of movement. So walk instead of taking the car or the bus. Park farther away. Maybe take the stairs if you've been following on Instagram or 30-day challenge. I have only posted more recently about the stairs, but I've been taking the stairs, and at the grocery store, I actually love that about Nova Scotia. We often park farther away from the door. In Nova Scotia, you see cars kind of littered all over the place in the parking lot, and then people get out and walk. They kind of park wherever. Remember, living in Ontario, everyone parks as close as they can to the door, and you won't see a parking lot where the cars are scattered as much. They're much, much closer. So good job, Nova Scotia, if you're already doing that. Just continue to do that. So park a little farther away. It's an extra 30 seconds of walking, and that will add up. Natural movement, incorporating these things into your daily life can be really, really helpful. And so there's this whole other world of natural movement, that word I just mentioned, of being able to incorporate exercise into how we are living. And this incorporates, I am sitting on the floor right now. So in our society, we tend to sit on the floor and stand. We're kind of only doing these 2 movements. It's a whole nother world to get into natural movement, and we're going to explore this in the future as well. But incorporating some of those things where we're reaching all the way up and then we're, getting all the way down to the ground. And this is just more of that movement rather than sit, stand, lie down. Because of those tend to be at least almost like more of a prestigious kind of thing in our society. Don't have to open up the garage door by yourself anymore, reach all the way down and all the way up. You only have to push a button. And so we're getting lazy. So incorporate more natural movement into your days. Okay, and we're going to again explore that in the future. Okay, so I love this. I listened to a podcast last night by 3 medical doctors, and they discussed the topic of obesity. They mentioned a statistics I thought was shocking and also really interesting. So 250 milliliters per day added of pop or juice. He also mentioned milk, so I'm not sure where that falls in. It does still incorporate some more sugar. So these are added calories that you just started consuming one day. Pop, juice, possibly milk. and approximately will build up approximately 10 pounds per year simply by adding in these calories that you weren't consuming before. So in 10 years, that's an additional 100 pounds for this sort of sneaky, flying under the radar kind of habit that you would be incorporating every day. Kind of doesn't seem like a big deal to just have an extra 250 milliliters. That's actually a cup, so a small amount into your daily habit. Doesn't seem like a big deal. 100 pounds over 10 years ends up probably feeling like a big deal if someone's putting that on and isn't realizing why. So let's try to be mindful of everything that you're eating. Be mindful if it's a new habit you've picked up. Be mindful if it's something that you think is going to impact you in a way that you don't think it is. And I like this stat because we can take it as the same thing for a positive. So mindful habits that we incorporate, maybe taking out a few of those calories over time. Again, it's going to be a longer duration, so over a full year, over 10 years, is going to then influence our eating. The timing of when we eat and drink, and then the movement and how we incorporate that. So here's an example with movement. If you do 15 minutes of exercise every single day, by the end of the week, that's an hour and 3/4 of an hour, incorporated more of exercise. By the end of the month, that's 7.5 hours, almost an entire day, working day, of exercise that you will have done that you didn't do before if you have 15 minutes of exercise incorporated. And by the end of the year, that is 90 hours of exercise extra from doing only 15 minutes every single day. Imagine the health impact on your metabolism, your heart, your brain blood flow, if we're, aging and concerned about dementia, all these other things. So many good things. And that's not even to mention all the endorphins, the sweating, and the good things that are happening, the detoxing, everything that happens, and the happiness that exercise and those endorphins release can bring you on a daily basis. Amazing. So try easier, make it fun, decide what you like to do, improve all of these things. If you're having trouble losing weight, or you're having trouble gaining weight, or you're feeling nauseous or bloated all the time, all these different things, those are all things that are going to be significantly impacting your digestive system. So have someone check it out if you're not sure exactly where to go with that. We have one more thing that I wanted to get into, and it seems like this is going to run a little longer. So we're going to have a short session next week. We're going to incorporate all the last bits of our eating mindfully. We're going to have a part 4 of 4 next week to do that. Thank you so much for joining. Let's try easier, incorporate what you can. Today is our day 22 and week 22, fun how that matched up, of our 30-day challenge. So if you haven't started, you're more than welcome to start the challenge now too. And then just see how it goes. Enjoy the challenge, enjoy the last couple days of the challenge. It's been great. Follow me along on Instagram here, and you can even post the hashtag Mental Fortress Mondays, incorporate it into your challenge and whatnot, and we will continue to do this together. I'll see you next week.